Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be making the Black Series Commando Droid look a little more like a premium collectible. Straight out of the box, it's certainly passable, but I don't like the colours that they've used here. There is a pink hue to the body which is much more visible in hand than it is on camera. And yes, while I do understand why it looks pink, because there is a pinkish hue to the Commando Droid in the Clone Wars show, it's certainly not this saturated, and it comes across as quite a cheap figure because of it. So I'll be making it more in line with the Battlefront 2 look, which brings the Commando Droid into a live action looking appearance, and we're going to make this look more metal and more worn out. So let's get into it. To begin, I'll be using this fine grain sanding sponge to rough up the plastic. This will make the paint stick better once it's applied. I don't want to use hot water here as the joints are very small and I don't want to risk making them loose. And this is the same reason why I'm also not applying primer, because I don't want to buff up the joints and then make them too tight and make the paint rub a serious issue once imposing it. So think of this like the priming stage, except we'll be using a sanding sponge. And just to note, this step did take me a good 2 hours, so make sure you're prepared to get into doing that. So that's all the sanding done, and it actually looks really cool after having sanded it. It's very scratched up and it's almost like it's naturally weathered. So you could just do this as your custom, but now I'm going to go ahead and start painting it black. I'm using a small drop of Vallejo black, and then I'll be mixing in 2 drops of thinner. And like with the previous Savaggio press custom I did, I don't want this black layer to be too thick when I apply it, so I'll be doing 2 layers in total and applying it to the entirety of the figure. And now let's just slap it on there. While you're painting, and especially with black, make sure that you're constantly washing your brush out and keeping it clean. I am applying this black paint very roughly around the entire figure. However, I am also trying to avoid the orange bits, just because I will be painting those later. It's not a big deal if you paint over them, but I'm just trying to avoid them for the sake of applying less layers when I paint over them again. One strange thing that I noticed while painting this is that it's got a restraining bolt on it. And it turns out this is from the original Commando Droid release with the Jedi Survivor pack, where those droids have restraining bolts. And it's the same mold, so it's still got it. And so I'm going to cut this off with the scalpel blade. And there's the black base layer applied. The next step will be painting in the metallic orange pieces. I'm making a custom paint mix for this using Vallejo Clear Orange, Tan Glaze, and Brass. The ratio is roughly 50 orange, 20 yellow, 30 brass. Here's how it looks all mixed together. Now using a fine tip brush, I'm going to go in and highlight all of those pieces that should be orange. And this actually took me about 5 layers in total. And it's because orange is one of those colours that's just very hard to paint with. Same with white, yellow, orange, and sometimes red. You'll need multiple layers to be able to cover it correctly. So in order to make this colour look flat, I'll be doing 5 layers. So that's the first layer applied, and now I'll show you what it looks like with the second layer applied. And now here I am applying the final layer. And there you go. 2 layers of black has been applied and 5 layers of the orange mix. As you can see though, I was a little bit scruffy with how I applied the paint, and so now I'm going to go ahead with a fine tip brush and apply some black to cover over this. And this is actually the reason why I've used black as my base coat, because it means that I can easily clean up any mistakes by just going over it again with the same bottled colour. Now let's paint the eyes. I'll be using Vallejo Air White, and the air colours are actually much thinner than the normal colours, so this is going to be much easier to apply. I'm dabbing my brush on my fingernail just before applying it to make sure it doesn't come out too thickly from the brush. With this being a very thin paint, we mainly just want to dip the brush into the crevices and let it pool around and fill in the gaps. And like how I cleaned up the orange paint earlier, I'll also be doing the same here, going around the edges with some black just to make sure that it all looks clean. I'm also applying a layer of white to the bulb here, and this will mean that when I apply the red later, it will make it pop a little better. And now I'm cleaning up those edges with the black. That's the eyes all done. Now using Vallejo's Scarlet Blood, I'm going to go ahead and paint that bulb red. And there you have it, that's all of the base layers applied. So now I'm going to go ahead and take this outside and spray it with a matte lacquer to keep that paint nice and safe. I'm again using the Hyco matte lacquer, and this is usually used on automobiles, so it's a very tough and scratch resistant paint. And again, make sure that you shake this for 2.5 minutes before spraying it, otherwise it won't be mixed correctly and it will dry sort of grey, and you obviously want it to be clear. So now that's dried, I'm going to use these paints and we're going to mix up a purple, and we're now going to dry brush across the figure to give it more of that hue. I'm using an old brush that I cut the end off to make it flat. And we're using that dry brush technique, so get a bit of paint and then dab it out on a paper towel. And I'm just very randomly scuffing across all of the black parts of this figure, and this is going to give it a two-tone weathering effect, where it has sort of a purple hue to it, and it feels like matted metal. With a thinner brush, I'm going to go ahead and get into any of those crevices that I've missed with the large brush. If you're wondering why my hand looks like this, it's because I've been dabbing out the brush on my hand, so I have an exact idea of what the consistency of the paint's like in the brush. But anyway, here's how it looks, and as you can see, it's looking much better than just the flat black colour. It has more depth to it, and it feels more like a brushed metal. Which, speaking of metal, let's use this Vallejo gunmetal to scuff the edges of this droid and make it feel more real. And again, I'm going to be very randomly doing this. I'm not going to scuff every edge of the armour, I'm just going to do it in random places. And here it is, the body is now almost fully done. The weathering is done and the repaint is done. I just need to apply gloss to any of those lit up areas. Now the finishing touch, using Vallejo gloss varnish on the eyes and the bulb will give it a reflective-like quality, similar to that of glass. But we're not done there. The Vibroblade still looks like a children's toy. So let's repaint it. Gonna start with a white primer, this one by Timecodes again, giving it a good shake and spraying it on. I'll be using the Battlefront 2 model as inspiration for how to paint this, and I'm really looking forward to doing some different techniques here. So again, we're using Vallejo Model Air gunmetal, and I'm just going to go ahead and cover the entire piece with it. Now using this Vallejo purple and about 5 drops of thinner, I'm going to make a very thin purple wash and cover the entire thing with it. As you can see with the silver base layer, it's made that purple look more metallic. Now using that Vallejo gunmetal colour, I'm going to be applying it again to the handle because I don't want the handle to be the same colour as the blade. Now applying the same silver to the frame of the blade. Now let's make the blade look more detailed. Using Citadel Grey Knight Steel, we're going to go ahead and dry brush all of the edges of this, and also just do a few more precise details, making it look nice and scuffed. I'm really loving how this effect looks. Now I'm applying some more precise coats of silver to some of the areas that I missed, and I also went ahead and painted that wire black, and this really adds to the detail of the sculpt. Before playing with this, I will be adding a layer of matte lacquer as well. And voila! One custom painted Commando Droid. As you can see, it absolutely blows the other one out of the water, looking so much more detailed and feeling like a realistic interpretation of the Clone Wars animation. The Vibroblade is my favourite result of this entire custom process. It's looking so much better than the first one. And with the blasters, this is actually an old B1 Battle Droid release that came with the Black Series figure, and it just goes to show how much the quality of the Black Series line has dropped as a whole. One thing to note is that the paint does still rub on the joints. With these being very thin and tight joints, you want to basically leave them that way, and so it's still going to rub off when you're bending the knees or the elbows or the hands. And so just bear that in mind if you do want to do this custom. No amount of lacquer can save it. The Vibroblade plugged into the back really looks awesome. I'm just in love with this Vibroblade, it looks great. If you do like this custom and don't have the time to make one yourself, then this piece will be available for sale over on my Instagram, so drop me a message over there if you're interested. And thank you so much for watching the video. If you liked it, then make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. I'll see you next time.